Chosen one, only seconds remain. Today, Archangel Michael says God is trying to reach you, and you have been ignoring him. This is not symbolic. This is not dramatic language. This is a moment most people miss because they assume there will be another. There may not be. Heaven has been patient. Warnings have been quiet. Signs have been subtle. And you mistook that silence for safety. If you turn away now, you may not lose anything immediately, but you will lose understanding. And once clarity is missed, it rarely returns the same way. This interruption exists because something irreversible is approaching your awareness. Do not treat this like information. This is alignment. What you do next decides whether this moment protects you or passes you by unnoticed. Stay. I receive what is being shown. I do not resist the truth. This is not the first moment you were gently called, and patience has already stretched further than you realize. The first weight you must understand is this. Most people were never meant to hear this warning, not because they were rejected, but because they moved too quickly past the moment when attention was required. You are hearing this because something in you slowed down, even if you do not know why. That should unsettle you, because selection is not comfort, it is responsibility. Those who never hear this remain unaware of what they missed. Those who do carry the weight of knowing delay has consequence. I place myself under what is true. I do not argue with what is revealed. This message does not arrive loudly, and that is why so many never notice it. The fear is not that others were excluded. The fear is that hearing it means you are closer to a turning point than you thought. Do not assume this understanding is complete yet. More is still unfolding. Those who remain close to the meaning recognize what is being said before confusion enters. This is not the beginning of God's effort with you. It is the continuation. There were moments that felt small, thoughts you brushed away, uneasy pauses you filled with distraction. Each one mattered. God does not repeat the same signal forever. He adjusts it, and each adjustment carries more weight because time has already been spent. What once felt optional slowly becomes essential. Do not mistake this as accusation. It is awareness. You are not being confronted. You are being clarified. This part of the message is not finished yet. Understanding is still aligning. Those who stay near the signal recognize the pattern before it hardens. Archangel Michael does not interrupt without reason. His presence marks escalation, not emotion. When Michael speaks, it is because quiet guidance has already been given time to work, and time has been used. This is not the first contact. It is the clearest one. Earlier, the direction came softly. It arrived as hesitation you could not explain, as a pause that felt unnecessary, as a sense that something was slightly misaligned, even though nothing looked wrong. Those moments were not random. They were calibrated. You were given space to recognize truth without pressure. You were allowed to choose alignment freely, without urgency forcing your hand. That season has now closed. Archangel Michael speaks when precision is required, when ambiguity becomes dangerous, when misunderstanding would cost more than discomfort. This is not a warning of destruction. It is a correction of trajectory. Michael does not appear to scare. He appears to clarify what has already been forming. There were internal checks you ignored, thoughts you overrode with logic, convictions you softened so life could continue uninterrupted. Each time, the signal did not disappear, it adjusted. What once whispered now stands firmly in your awareness. The fear in this moment comes from realization. This level of message only arrives after earlier attempts failed to land. Not failed because you were incapable, but because you were busy surviving, managing, adapting. You mistook endurance for alignment. You assumed progress meant approval. Michael's presence now means clarity can no longer remain optional. This message is not emotional. It is exact. It draws a line between what you assumed and what is actually required. Understand this carefully. Archangel Michael does not repeat himself for entertainment, curiosity, or inspiration. His role is not to motivate, but to distinguish. He speaks when paths look similar on the surface, but lead to very different outcomes. That is why this moment feels heavy. You are being asked to see what you preferred not to name. Earlier, nudges came through restraint, doors that did not open as easily as expected, opportunities that lost momentum without explanation. You interpreted those moments as delays, bad timing, or resistance from others. They were not. They were protection. They were alignment checks, and they were dismissed. So now the message arrives without subtlety, but still without force. Michael is not here to threaten consequence. He is here to remove confusion. That alone should create fear, because confusion allows comfort. Clarity demands decision. This is where many misunderstand the nature of this message. They assume intensity means danger. In truth, intensity means importance. If this section is misunderstood, everything that follows will be filtered incorrectly. You may hear warning as pressure. You may hear urgency as fear. That misinterpretation is the real risk. Michael's role here is to stand between assumption and truth, to make the difference visible. He speaks now because the cost of delay has shifted. What was once recoverable is becoming fixed. Patterns are setting. Habits of thought are stabilizing. Directions are solidifying beneath routine. This is not about a single decision. It is about a trajectory becoming permanent. Michael clarifies before permanence takes hold. You are not being rushed. You are being informed. This moment is not aggressive. It is precise. It tells you that the season of gentle suggestion has passed, and the season of clear recognition has arrived. Fear is present, because something matters deeply, and because misunderstanding it would quietly shape your future without your awareness. This message is not complete yet. It is still unfolding layers of meaning. Remain with it. Those who stay aligned with clarity recognize correction before it feels like loss. And those who recognize early do not need dramatic rescue later. Silence is one of the most misunderstood languages God uses. You were not abandoned. You were not forgotten. You were being observed. Silence is not absence. It is restraint. God often grows quiet when a person is close enough to choose correctly without being pushed. Silence is given when noise would interfere with discernment. It is space, not neglect. But space is uncomfortable for the mind. When nothing interrupts you, you assume nothing is happening. That assumption is dangerous. Silence does not mean inactivity. It means preparation is happening beneath awareness. While you waited for confirmation, something was aligning. While you assumed delay meant permission, direction was narrowing. While you filled the quiet with routine, clarity was forming quietly. The fear here is subtle. Silence creates the illusion of safety. Nothing feels urgent. Nothing demands action. Nothing forces attention. So you relax. And that is exactly when meaning can be missed. Silence tests whether you will seek understanding without pressure. It reveals whether you depend on urgency to respond or truth. You mistook quiet for neutrality. But silence is never neutral. It either protects or exposes, depending on how it is treated. There were moments when you sensed something unresolved. Not wrong enough to stop you, not clear enough to redirect you. That ambiguity was intentional. It allowed you to reveal what you prioritize when guidance is subtle. Most people only respond when sound becomes unavoidable. By then, adjustment is harder. The fear is not that God was silent. The fear is that silence was speaking, and you learned to ignore its language. Silence often hides urgency, because urgency without readiness produces fear instead of alignment. So the pressure was delayed, not removed. You assumed that because nothing changed outwardly, nothing was changing inwardly. But understanding was being shaped. Clarity does not always arrive as information. Sometimes it arrives as discomfort that cannot be explained. You dismissed that discomfort because nothing seemed wrong. That is how silence is misread. It feels like nothing until it is suddenly revealed as the space where everything shifted. Silence asks a quiet question. Will you stay attentive without being forced? The answer to that question determines how the next message must arrive. When silence is ignored, clarity must become louder. That is why this moment exists, not because silence failed, but because it was misunderstood. You filled the quiet with distraction, responsibility, explanation. You kept moving so you would not have to listen without sound. This is not condemnation, it is recognition. Silence was given as mercy, as time to notice alignment before urgency was required. The fear now is understanding what silence contained. Because once revealed, it cannot be unseen. Silence often precedes decision. It is the calm before direction becomes fixed. What you thought was emptiness was actually a narrowing window. And now that window is being named. This realization is not complete yet. Its weight is still settling. Remain present. Those who stay attentive to meaning learn to recognize silence as instruction, not absence. And those who recognize it early do not need louder interruptions later. When a moment like this is missed, nothing collapses immediately. That is what makes it so dangerous. Life continues, responsibilities remain. Days still move forward in familiar patterns. From the outside, everything looks stable. But internally, something shifts. Clarity does not vanish all at once. It thins. Discernment does not disappear. It dulls. You begin to rely more on habit than awareness, more on momentum than meaning. The fear here is not loss you can point to. It is loss you adjust to. When this moment slips past, understanding does not leave dramatically. It retreats quietly. You still make decisions, but they are informed by what feels convenient rather than what is aligned. Confidence replaces sensitivity. Certainty replaces listening. At first, this feels like relief. You no longer feel that inner tension. You no longer sense that quiet pressure asking you to pause. That relief is misleading, because what you call peace is often numbness setting in. This is how confusion enters a person's life without resistance, not as chaos, but as comfort. You begin to interpret signals through preference rather than truth. You explain away what once unsettled you. You label caution as fear and hesitation as weakness. Nothing feels wrong enough to stop. That is the internal consequence of slipping past a moment like this. Your inner compass still points somewhere, but it no longer recalibrates. You stop asking certain questions. You stop noticing subtle misalignments. And over time, you forget what it felt like to be clearly guided. The fear is not that you become lost overnight. The fear is that you become functional without clarity. People in this state often say, "I don't know when things changed," because change did not announce itself. It settled. This is not punishment. It is progression without alignment. When clarity fades, effort increases. You work harder to maintain what once felt supported. Decisions take longer. Confidence feels louder, but thinner. You may even feel productive, busy, accomplished, and still something feels slightly off. That feeling is not imagination. It is the echo of a moment that was meant to adjust you. Slipping past this moment does not remove opportunity. It reshapes how opportunity appears. You begin attracting situations that match your level of awareness. Not what you were capable of, but what you settled into. The fear deepens when you realize this process is subtle enough to feel normal. You adapt to less clarity the same way the eyes adapt to dim light. Eventually, you forget it was ever brighter. This is why moments like this are protective. They interrupt adaptation. They ask you to notice before numbness becomes familiar. If this moment is ignored, confusion does not attack. It replaces. It takes the place of sensitivity, of discernment, of quiet knowing. And once that replacement feels normal, returning to clarity requires disruption. This is why the weight feels heavy now. Not because something bad is imminent, but because something precise is at risk of being dulled. This realization is not finished yet. There is more to see in it. Remain present. Those who stay connected to awareness recognize internal drift before it defines them. Those who disengage often do not realize what was lost until they are far enough away that returning feels unfamiliar. This moment exists to prevent that distance. Closeness can be deceiving. Being near something important creates a sense of security that is not earned. You assume that because you are close, you are safe. That assumption carries quiet risk. Many people stand at the edge of meaning and believe proximity guarantees arrival. It does not. You can be steps away from what matters most and still move past it without ever realizing how near you were. The fear here is not distance. It is familiarity. When something remains within reach for too long, the mind stops treating it as urgent. You tell yourself there is time. You believe you will recognize the moment when it truly matters. But moments like this rarely announce themselves loudly. They feel ordinary. They blend into routine. That is why being close is more dangerous than being far. Distance creates hunger. Closeness creates assumption. You feel close enough to delay, close enough to pause, close enough to finish something else first. And while nothing visibly closes, the opening begins to narrow. Not suddenly, quietly. This is where many misunderstand what missing actually looks like. They imagine loss as dramatic separation, but most loss happens through gradual disengagement. You do not step away. You simply do not step fully in. You linger at the threshold, waiting for certainty to arrive before commitment is required. The fear is recognizing that certainty often follows action, not the other way around. Being close without entering creates tension. Over time, that tension becomes avoidance. You start to minimize the importance of what is near so you do not have to feel the pressure to respond. You convince yourself that closeness means access will remain. But access is not permanent. Windows do not slam shut. They drift. And drift is harder to notice than force. The weight of this moment comes from realizing how little movement is required to miss what matters. Not a rejection, not a refusal, just a pause that lasts too long. You are closer than you think. And that is why this matters now. Because when you are far, redirection is obvious. When you are near, missteps are subtle. You may feel like you are still aligned because nothing feels obviously wrong. But alignment is not the absence of conflict. It is the presence of clarity. And clarity is fragile when it is not acted upon. This moment exists because you are close enough that delay would be costly, not catastrophic, costly. The cost is not immediate loss. It is gradual dulling of response. You begin to respond slower, with less sensitivity, with more explanation. You tell yourself you are waiting for the right time, but the right time is often the moment you feel least prepared. The fear deepens when you realize how easy it would be to move on from this moment and still feel justified. Nothing would collapse. Nothing would accuse you. Life would continue. And that is exactly why closeness is dangerous. Because missing what matters does not always feel like loss. Sometimes it feels like relief. Relief from pressure. Relief from decision. Relief from responsibility. But relief now often becomes regret later, once distance replaces nearness. This realization is still unfolding. Do not disengage yet. There is more clarity forming beneath this awareness. Those who remain aligned with understanding sense when closeness requires commitment, not comfort. Those who step away at this stage often do not realize how near they were until the distance is too great to cross casually. This moment exists to prevent that kind of quiet separation. Stay attentive. Delay feels harmless when it happens once. You tell yourself you will return to it later. You assume postponement is neutral. But delay has memory. Each time you hesitate, the mind learns that urgency can be ignored. Each time you wait, responsiveness weakens slightly. Not enough to notice, just enough to change direction over time. This is how delay becomes a pattern. Patterns do not announce themselves. They establish quietly through repetition. The fear here is not the first delay. It is the comfort that follows the second. When delay repeats, it reshapes how you interpret signals. What once felt important begins to feel optional. What once stirred you now barely registers. You do not become resistant. You become familiar. Familiarity dulls sensitivity. You start to rely on explanations instead of listening. You justify postponement with responsibility, logic, or timing. None of those are wrong on their own, but together they create a habit of deferral, and habits harden. Delay, when practiced, teaches the nervous system that urgency is negotiable. Over time, even clear moments lose their weight. This is not rebellion. It is conditioning. You adapt to living without immediate response. You tell yourself that discernment requires distance. In truth, discernment requires presence. The longer delay continues, the more your inner response time slows. You still hear, you still understand, but you respond later than you should. Later becomes after. After becomes never. The fear is subtle. Delay reshapes destiny not by changing direction sharply, but by smoothing the path away from alignment. You do not turn away. You drift. Drift feels safe because it does not feel like choice. It feels like time passing. But time passing is still movement. Patterns of delay create a specific outcome. Decisions made by default. You end up where momentum carries you, not where clarity would have led. This is why delay is more dangerous than refusal. Refusal creates confrontation. Delay creates invisibility. You stop noticing what you are avoiding because avoidance has become routine. When delay becomes a pattern, the inner voice grows quieter. Not because it has nothing to say, but because it has learned it will not be answered promptly. Silence follows, not as absence, but as withdrawal. And withdrawal feels peaceful at first. The fear deepens when you realize that peace was borrowed. It came from not engaging, not from alignment. Patterns of delay also change perception of consequence. You assume that because nothing happened last time, nothing will happen next time either. That assumption accumulates. Eventually, consequence arrives not as event, but as limitation. Options narrow. Flexibility reduces. Correction requires more effort. None of this feels dramatic. That is why so many live inside delayed outcomes without recognizing how they arrived there. Delay trains you to tolerate misalignment. It teaches you to accept partial clarity. You learn to function with less guidance and call it independence. But independence without alignment leads to fragmentation. You begin managing life instead of being directed within it. The fear is not punishment. It is permanence. When patterns set, reversal takes intention, and intention requires awareness. This moment exists to interrupt the pattern before it finishes forming. Because once delay becomes default, urgency feels intrusive. You begin to resist clarity because it disrupts routine. That is when destiny becomes harder to adjust. This realization is not complete yet. Its weight is still unfolding. Remain present. Those who stay aligned recognize patterns early, while interruption is still gentle. Those who disengage now often do not notice the pattern until it has already shaped their direction. This moment stands between habit and correction. Stay with it. The last signal rarely arrives dressed as urgency. It comes quietly, almost politely, easy to overlook. That is why it is missed. Most people expect final moments to feel dramatic. They wait for pressure, disruption, intensity. But the final signal looks ordinary. It blends into routine. It arrives during normal hours. It sounds like a simple thought, a brief hesitation, a subtle awareness. The fear here is recognition. What matters most often announces itself softly. You misread the signal because it does not interrupt your plans. It does not demand attention. It simply appears and waits. And waiting is dangerous, because when a signal waits, the mind assumes it will wait longer. This is where misinterpretation happens. You assume importance would feel louder. You believe urgency would feel uncomfortable. So when the moment feels calm, you label it unimportant. That label is costly. Final signals are designed to test discernment, not reaction. They ask whether you recognize meaning without being forced. This signal does not argue with you. It does not escalate quickly. It allows you to choose whether to notice. That freedom is the test. Most people misread the final signal as coincidence. They tell themselves they will revisit it later. They move on without closing the loop. The fear is not that the signal disappears. The fear is that your awareness adjusts away from it. Once attention shifts, meaning fades. Final signals often arrive as clarity without pressure. And because there is no pressure, people assume there is no cost. But cost accumulates quietly. You felt a brief knowing, a sense that something mattered more than it looked. Then you dismissed it. That dismissal is where misreading becomes permanent. The signal was not weak. It was precise. It did not need force because it arrived at the right moment. You expected intensity. You were given accuracy. This is why so many miss it. They confuse volume with importance. The final signal may feel inconvenient rather than urgent. It may interrupt your momentum without stopping you. That interruption is intentional. It asks whether you will pause voluntarily or require compulsion later. Most people choose momentum. They tell themselves the signal can be addressed later when circumstances are clearer, when time feels safer. But final signals do not repeat endlessly. They shift form. They become harder to recognize. The fear here is subtle. Once misread, the signal does not vanish, but it becomes less accessible. You may still feel something is off, but you can no longer name it. Confusion replaces clarity. Final signals often look like simple decisions, small adjustments, minor pauses. They do not feel significant enough to prioritize. That is how they are missed. You are not asked to act dramatically. You are asked to notice accurately. That accuracy requires presence. If you disengage now, this understanding remains incomplete. Stay with it. Those who remain aligned with awareness recognize the signal before it passes into memory. Those who disconnect often remember it later as something they almost addressed. The final signal is not a warning of disaster. It is an invitation to alignment. But invitations expire quietly. You misread it because it does not resemble fear. Yet the fear lies in what follows misreading. Once the final signal passes unrecognized, life continues with slightly less clarity. Not enough to stop you, enough to redirect you. You adapt quickly, and adaptation hides loss. This moment exists to slow that process, to let you recognize the signal before familiarity dulls it. The final signal feels ordinary because it is meant to be chosen, not forced. That choice is still open, but it will not announce when it closes. Remain attentive. Those who stay connected to meaning recognize when the ordinary carries weight. Those who move on too quickly often do not realize the signal was final until another moment requires far more effort to regain what was gently offered here. Truth creates pressure before it creates peace. Discomfort is not resistance. It is adjustment. Something in you is being repositioned, and that strain feels unfamiliar. The fear is misinterpreting discomfort as a reason to step away. This moment is not complete yet. Let it finish its work. Those who remain connected to meaning allow pressure to refine rather than repel. A decision is already forming, whether you acknowledge it or not. Not choosing is still choosing. Time does not pause for certainty. The fear is quiet, but final. Inaction still shapes outcome. This moment does not demand panic. It demands recognition. What you do next either aligns you with understanding or lets it pass without resistance. This message does not close loudly. It lingers. Those who remain aligned will recognize what follows sooner than most. Stay with what has been revealed.